This is a video where we're going to talk about how you can communicate to your dog, or more specifically, how we can disagree with our dog. Now, I've developed what I call a series of 4 escalating consequences, and I use them in sequential order. Sometimes I'll combine them if necessary. The very first one that I use is a hissing sound like a cat. I do this for 2 reasons. Number 1, there's no question who we're talking to. And number 2, cats, skunks, snakes, cougars, mountain lions make this hissing sound as a warning. So it's biologic. The dog will instinctively react to it. So I have 10 hisses. I have a level 1 hiss, which is like which is for low level stuff. And then I have a level 10 hiss, which is more like a. So you see how that made her move away. So I want to be able to articulate my no and match her energy. If she's at level 5 energy and I hiss at level 3, she won't listen, or if she does, she won't respect it. All right, so the first thing I do is I hiss 1 time per incident, and 3 little hisses does not equate to 1 big hiss. A lot of people go tss, tss, tss. The hiss I translate to no, don't do that, or most effectively, don't even think about doing it. Right there, it's most effective if you preemptively use it before the dog does the wrong thing. So if the dog's, let's say, not supposed to be within 7 feet of me because I'm eating, and let's say this is the 7-foot line just for demonstration purposes, I would do it when the dog's maybe a foot away if it's walking towards me, or about 2 or 3 feet away if it's running towards me, to give it enough chance to not break the boundary. That's the first thing I do, is I hiss 1 time per incident, and I always start with the hiss. Second thing I do is I abruptly stand up. Can you see my face? Perfect. All right, so now when I stand up, my authority is directional. It goes whatever direction my hips are pointing at. Now as a dog, what a dog will do, when I first do this, we're hanging out, we're both at 0. When I stand up, I'm in an action position, and that puts me 1 level above the dog. So what a dog will do is it's going to take a step back to kind of even and balance the scales. Second thing it's going to do is walk around. They're going to do this because our authority is directional when we stand up. It goes whatever direction our belly button or our belt buckle is pointed. Right now my authority is pointed at the camera. So if the dog is looking at me, or if the human's looking at me, I'm the dog, and I turn and walk over here and the human keeps on facing there, then I literally, as a dog, walked away from the human's authority. So when the dog gets up and starts moving, you want to keep it in front of you and pivot. If you notice, I'm doing this without moving my feet. I just want to keep my feet stationary. I can move my foot if I need to, but a whole lot of little movements tell the dog this is a play or this is a game. So I keep on pivoting and keep that dog in front of me until the dog tells me it's done challenging me. And it'll do that by doing one of 4 things. It'll either leave the room completely if it has the authority to do that. It'll stand in place, it will sit, or it will lie down. Now, as soon as it does any of those 4 things, well, I guess those 3 things. If it leaves the room, you don't have to do it. You can just go back to doing what you're doing. But if it stands, sits, or lies down after you're pivoting it, as soon as it does that, within 3 seconds maximum, but the sooner you do this, the better, you want to take 2 steps backwards. And that's your way of saying, because you stopped challenging me as a dog by stopping, I stopped challenging you back. Now, when I walk backwards, I just take 2 steps. This is how a lot of people take 2 steps. Can you see my feet in this one? You can just do it, just keep on my waist down. So when people, a lot of times they do it, I go step back and they go like this. And then they like put their hands on their hips and they cock their hip, or they do something like that. That looks like I'm meandering. So when I step backwards, I want more like, and that's it. Now you can come back up to me. Now when I do this, I also put a period at the end of this doggy sentence. And I do that by putting a 1-second pause at the end. The 1-second pause means we're done. So to do this in real life, so if the dog's approaching me, I stand up abruptly, turn to face the dog. As soon as the dog's stationary, I'm going to move forward. As soon as the dog's stationary, I take 2 steps backwards, and I pause for 1 second, and then I can go back to sitting down or doing whatever it was I was doing. That's the second escalating consequence. Standing up abruptly, turning to face the dog, and keeping your hips pointed towards it till it stops moving, taking 2 steps back, pausing 1 second, then you can go back to doing what you're doing. The third escalating consequence involves giving and taking territory. For dogs, front-facing is confrontational. Sideways is approachable. For a dog, if we allow that, if 2 dogs meet and one dog runs up to the other one face to face, that's almost a challenge. Sometimes that creates a fight. When dogs meet, they kind of do it in a circle or go sideways and eventually make a T. So for this, I'm disagreeing with the dog. So I want to use that confrontational approach. So what I would do for the third consequence, so I'm going to go ahead and stand up again, is I'm going to march deliberately at the dog. Now, when I say march, a lot of people think I mean stomping. I don't mean stomping. I mean moving briskly towards the dog. The dog needs to think, if I'm still here when the human gets here, the human is going to run me over. Now, before I continue with these, another little dog training tip or dog behavior tip. Leaders do not defer to followers. If I'm a leader and I invite all my employees into a company conference room, when I come in late to go talk to them, I don't say, excuse me, can I get through? Pardon me. I show up and they just crunch themselves together because we defer to authority figures. So if Penny is standing here in my way and she's blocking me from going here, a lot of us would just simply walk around the tables and the couch to get to where we're going. But that means I'm burning extra energy, and that's something that a follower would do. So if she's standing in your way, I would like you to walk through her as if she's not even there. Now, we certainly don't want to hurt her, so be careful you don't step on her. But if we're too careful and we're slow down and we're tiptoe around her, then she'll see, careful your finger, then she'll see that, well, they're deferring around me, and if I'll just act stationary, then the human will move around me. Now, if the human is sitting, if the dog is sitting or lying down, and you kick it or nudge it and say, get up, that's just being very rude. So don't do that. You could step over and walk around her. But if she's standing, I don't want you to go around her anymore. And the reason for that is this consequence, the third consequence, which we'll get back to now, is marching deliberately at the dog until the dog turns sideways or greater away from you. Now, when the dog, like I said, this is confrontational. So when the dog turns sideways, it's saying, I'm done challenging you. So when it does, as soon as it turns sideways, I want to stop. Now this looks indecisive with my feet apart, so I would complete my movement, and now I go to the second consequence. I'm pivoting till that dog is stationary, then I take 2 steps back, and I pause 1 second. Off. We'll talk about that later. But basically, so for this one, I'm going to march directly at the dog until it turns sideways, stop, pivot, basically go to the second consequence. And then as soon as the dog is stationary, I pause 1 second after I take the 2 steps back, and then I can wait. Then I can go back to doing what I'm doing. The only time this wouldn't apply is if the dog is in a designated no dog zone. Let's say for the purposes of demonstration, and we're a little bit close quarters, so I'll just kind of do it here. Let's say that as a dog, I'm not supposed to be really, let's say the line is behind me. And I'm supposed to be over here. I'm not supposed to be on this side of the line, but the human has food. So I cross the line, and the human wants to disagree with me. The human marches at me, I turn sideways right away. Well, I'm still supposed to be on that side of this line. So as the human, you would bump into the dog and keep bumping into the dog until the dog gets across the boundary. The guardian asked me earlier, because one of the rules I suggested was that the dog has to stay out of the kitchen. She said, how do I keep her out of the kitchen? This is how you would do it. You would march directly at her. Careful your finger. Now, if she moves, if I'm marching at her, she's here, and she moves over there, don't keep on marching this way. March directly wherever she is. And you keep marching at her, and again, have some suddenness in your step until she crosses that line. Now, let's say the line is here, and I march, and then I move the dog across the line. Here's the kitchen. Now, if I turn and go back into the kitchen, my authority now is pointing here. The dog's going to run right up my butt. So if the line is here, once I get the dog across the line, I'm going to stop. I'm going to take 1 step backwards and pause. When I move back like this, the dog is probably going to come forward. When it does, I'm going to take a step right back to it. I probably make the hissing sound at the same time. Once the dog gets across the line, I stop. When it's stationary, it doesn't have to be stationary, but if the dog is moving towards you and you move back, you're implied as giving up that room for the dog. So as soon as the dog is stationary, you take a step back and you're testing the dog. Does the dog stay in place? If it does, you take another step back. If it starts to come forward, you rush towards it to say no. That's basically how you say no. Now, you're going to keep doing this at first. When you're doing this, you're going to walk backwards 1 step at a time, and it's going to seem a little bit frustrating. After a while, you can kind of walk backwards several steps without pausing in between each step. After a while, you'll be able to turn, and then I would watch her at the corner of my eye and turn my back to her. But this is only after you practice for a week or two, and she's doing pretty good at about staying behind the line before you start turning around and giving her your back. But again, for the first week or two, keep your eye down and watching her. So as soon as you cross that line, you turn and you rush right at her. And again, the suddenness of that is really important. The fourth consequence is what I call a leash timeout. Basically, I would put the dog on the leash, and I would step on the leash, in her case, about maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet away from where it's attached to her harness. Now, when she does this, she's probably going to throw a temper tantrum because she disagrees. But remember, when we do this, we're already disagreeing with the dog. We warned the dog not to do it by hissing. The dog did it anyway, so he stood up. It did it again, so we marched at it. It did it again. So now we do the leash timeout. The leash timeout basically says, if you're not going to listen to me and you're going to be defiant, the consequence is you lose all freedom until you return to a calm and balanced state of mind. Now, what a dog typically will do, let me grab a leash here, is I'll use the chain one, which it would be a little bit big for her, but it's the easiest one I have on. So when she sits, she's going to sit as far away as this leash will allow. Dogs have what we call an opposition reflex. If you pull them on the leash, they're programmed to pull against you. If she was laying down, I try to roll her onto one side or the other, she probably will push against me. Again, it's programmed to do so. So when she sits, she's going to sit, and this is going to be so tense, I could play it like a banjo. So dogs will, so as soon as I take my foot off the leash, she'll recognize that because she'll feel the tension removed. So what I do is I step on it, and again, in her case, I'd probably be stepping on about that far away. And then as soon as she sits down, I take the foot that's on the leash and I slide it towards her to take the tension off of the leash. So now it's relaxed. Now I don't tell her to sit. If I tell her to sit, she just follows a command. If she sits when I'm doing this, she's saying, I'm challenging you less. Now I wait, and I'm going to wait for her to lie down. When she lies down, she's saying, I surrender. I'm not challenging you at all anymore. Now I wait, because sometimes they sit down like this and they're laying down, but they're ready to pounce. I want her to lay down and her energy to be completely relaxed. When it is, then I very subtly take my foot off of the leash. She is now free, but she doesn't realize she's free. Now when she gets up eventually and walks away, she's going to be dragging the leash, and it's dangerous for a dog to drag the leash unsupervised. We don't want her to get hurt, so only do this when she's supervised. She goes in the other room, we follow her. But if we take the leash off right away, she thinks, oh, we're done. I can go back to jumping up on the person or whatever it was she was doing to get her in trouble in the first place. But if a couple minutes go by and she's good, then we detach the leash. It's not quid pro quo. If you use these consistently, now like I said, sometimes if, let's say I had surgery and I spilled some drugs or medication on the floor and she was going to come over to it, I might stand up and march with her all in one movement because I want to send a very strong message. But whenever possible, but the rest of the time, always, you want to start with your hiss. Because eventually, that's all you'll have to do. And if you time your hiss out properly, the dog will turn around and go and start doing the opposite of whatever they were doing. So these are the 4 escalating consequences I use to disagree with the dog for doing something I don't want.